In the bleak autumn of 1881, 19 young women training to become nurses at a secluded Massachusetts finishing school perished within 8 weeks of one another. Each demise followed the same dreadful sequence: violent tremors, speaking in languages unknown to them, and a peculiar, unsettling silvering of the eyes that physicians could not explain. The official cause was recorded as influenza, but the local doctor who attended to the bodies refused to sign the death certificates. He insisted the symptoms matched no known malady. More disturbing still, he found something in their tissue samples that compelled him to burn his medical journals and flee the township before dawn. The school's board of governors shuttered the institution immediately, forbidding entry to the property, and the 19 victims were laid to rest in anonymous plots behind the main hall. For over a century, the New England Association for Female Education has refused to comment on the events at Blackwood House, but recently unearthed diaries from a surviving student have unveiled a truth so unsettling that it clarifies why certain mysteries are destined to remain interred forever. Before we delve deeper into the narrative of Blackwood House and uncover what truly claimed those 19 young lives, I must share something vital. This channel is not for the faint of heart, but for the most courageous spirits who dare to unearth the truth behind America's most shadowy enigmas. Few platforms dare to share the accounts we present here, accounts that have been suppressed by powerful organizations and lost to the passage of time. If you have listened this far, you are unlike the majority. You are an individual who must comprehend what others fear to unearth. Therefore, click that subscribe button and become one of the select few who are privy to these secrets. Tell me in the comments which state you are listening from. Do you possess the fortitude to hear tales of mystery from your own region? Now, let us return to that ill-fated autumn in Massachusetts, where a force far more malevolent than any sickness was stealing young lives. Our account commences in the misty highlands of western Massachusetts, where the New England Association for Female Education had established Blackwood House in 1877. Named in honor of Lady Eleanor Blackwood, a celebrated benefactor who had perished in a tragic railway accident, the school was founded to educate the next generation of nurses and teachers for the burgeoning towns of the American Northeast. The campus sprawled across 150 acres of unspoiled forest, featuring a central edifice constructed from native granite and a modest assembly hall that could accommodate 60 individuals. Surrounding the main compound were student residences, a refectory, instructors' cottages, and a functional garden that supplied the community with fresh produce, all linked by gravel pathways that meandered beneath towering pine and birch trees. The school attracted young women from across Massachusetts and neighboring states, drawn by its reputation for rigorous academic training and its modest fees. Most students hailed from agricultural backgrounds or small villages, eager to serve their communities and bring knowledge and compassion to the growing industrial towns. The curriculum was demanding. Pupils studied anatomy and physiology, hygiene, patient care, educational theory, and practical teaching methods. They attended morning and evening assemblies, adhered to strict timetables, and were expected to conduct themselves with the utmost moral integrity. The selection process for applicants was stringent, requiring letters of endorsement from local pastors or community leaders, proof of academic readiness, and a detailed personal statement of their dedication to service. The association took seriously its duty to prepare virtuous women for their roles, where they would often face significant challenges requiring both practical skill and profound wisdom. In the late summer of 1881, 52 students were enrolled at Blackwood House. The eldest was 27-year-old Clara Vance, a former clerk from Suffolk County who had felt called to nursing after losing her brother to a wasting disease. Clara was a serious, introspective woman who had read widely on medicine and philosophy before her enrollment. Her peers respected her maturity and frequently sought her guidance on both academic and personal matters. The youngest was just 17, Fiona O'Malley, the daughter of Irish immigrants who had scrimped and saved to send their daughter to the school. Fiona's father had been lost at sea when she was a child, and her mother had labored as a laundress for years to afford her education. Fiona carried the weight of her family's sacrifices and was resolute in her determination to succeed, often studying by lamplight late into the night. Among them were farmers' daughters like Abigail Miller, whose family had cultivated the same soil in the Connecticut River Valley for generations. Abigail was known for her robust constitution and sunny disposition, always prepared with a kind word or a reassuring smile for her classmates. There was also Eliza Thorpe, a reserved young woman from the Berkshire Hills who had been raised by her aunt after her parents succumbed to cholera. Eliza was deeply devout and dedicated hours each day to silent contemplation and journaling, seeking divine direction for her future vocation. Beatrice Croft hailed from a prosperous Boston family that had initially objected to her career choice. Her father, a successful barrister, had wished for Beatrice to enter society, but the young woman had felt an undeniable summons to serve others. Beatrice was articulate and well-read, with a particular aptitude for the sciences that made her one of the school's most promising students. Lillian Marsh, whose family had settled in Springfield in the mid-1800s, was known for her intellectual curiosity and her propensity to ask penetrating questions that occasionally discomfited her instructors. Lillian had studied beyond the required syllabus and was fascinated by the emerging debates between traditional medicine and new scientific approaches. She was particularly intrigued by the relationship between the mind and the body, and how psychological states could influence physical health. Eleanor Webb, who would later become the sole survivor of the group's dreadful ordeal, was a pragmatic young woman from a fishing family in coastal Maine. She had been drawn to nursing not by a dramatic epiphany, but by a steady, unwavering conviction that she was meant to care for the sick. Eleanor was well regarded by her peers for her dependability and sound judgment, though she occasionally found the more abstract scientific theories challenging. The head of the school was Dr. Alastair Finch, a severe but just man in his 50s who had trained at Johns Hopkins under the renowned physician William Osler. Dr. Finch had been personally selected by the association to establish Blackwood House, and he brought with him a reputation for academic excellence and administrative competence. He demanded high standards from his students but was known to be genuinely invested in their professional and personal development. Dr. Finch resided on campus with his wife, Charlotte, and their teenage son, Henry. Charlotte Finch was an educated woman who had attended a prestigious academy in Boston, and she took an active interest in the students' welfare, often hosting them for tea and offering maternal counsel to young women far from their families. Henry, 17 years old and possessing both charm and intellect, was a favorite among the students for his gentle nature and clever conversation. He often assisted in the school's laboratory and was more knowledgeable about biology than many of the senior students. The school's faculty included Professor Silas Crowe, who taught anatomy and physiology and was known for his exacting standards and sardonic humor. Professor Crowe had spent time studying in France and brought European medical perspectives to his lectures, though he was careful to align with established American practices. There was also Professor Agnes White, who taught hygiene and patient care. Professor White was a gifted caregiver who had served in several city hospitals before accepting her teaching post, and her demonstrations were among the most valued at the school. The autumn of 1881 had been uncommonly harsh. Early frosts had arrived in September, and by October, the school was already isolated by icy winds and muddy, impassable roads that made travel to neighboring villages arduous. This seclusion was not entirely unwelcome, as it fostered an environment of intense study and personal reflection that the faculty encouraged. The students had settled into their winter regimen of concentrated academic work, their days filled with lectures, practical drills, and preparation for the spring evaluations that would determine their fitness for certification. The atmosphere was one of quiet diligence and purpose, punctuated only by the scratch of pens on paper, the rustle of textbook pages, the soft murmur of evening recitations, and the occasional pop of embers in the stoves that warmed the buildings. The school's library housed over 2,000 volumes, including works by Nightingale, Lister, and other medical pioneers, as well as journals, scientific texts, and manuals of practical care. Life at the school followed a rigorous schedule meticulously designed to promote both academic achievement and ethical growth. Students rose at 5:30 for private reflection, a practice Dr. Finch deemed essential for maintaining moral fortitude. Morning assembly was followed by breakfast at 6:30, a simple meal of oatmeal, toast, jam, and tea consumed in silence while a student read from an inspirational text. Classes commenced at 7 and continued until noon, covering subjects from human biology to sanitation to principles of education. Professor Crow's anatomy classes were infamous for their difficulty, and students frequently spent hours memorizing diagrams and terms for his quizzes. Professor White's patient care demonstrations were more popular, as she possessed a talent for making complex procedures understandable and emphasizing the human element of nursing. Afternoons were reserved for independent study and practical application, with a short recess for light calisthenics when the weather allowed. The school maintained a small greenhouse where students could tend to plants, an activity believed to be both physically and mentally restorative. More favored were strolls through the surrounding woods, which offered both fresh air and opportunities for quiet thought. Evening assembly was held at 6 and was attended by all students and faculty. Dr. Finch typically gave an address, though visiting lecturers and senior students were occasionally permitted to speak. The services followed a non-denominational Protestant format with hymn singing, prayer, scripture reading, and a brief sermon. The assembly hall itself was a handsome room with tall, arched windows that bathed the space in the fading afternoon light and a simple lectern fashioned from local cherry wood. After evening assembly, students gathered for communal study in the library or their common rooms. This was a time for reviewing the day's lessons, collaborating on projects, and informal discussion about their future vocations. The conversations were often earnest as young women contemplated the serious responsibilities they would soon shoulder. Students were expected to be in their rooms by 9, though many continued studying privately until much later. The dormitories were sparsely furnished but comfortable, each student having a small chamber containing a bed, a writing desk, a chair, a washstand, and a modest shelf for books. The buildings were heated by pot-bellied stoves in the common areas, though individual rooms could grow quite chilly during the harsh New England winters. Students were responsible for maintaining their own quarters and assisting with the general upkeep of the school grounds. The nearby hamlet of Oakhaven was small but supportive of the school's mission. The village consisted of roughly 400 souls, primarily farmers and tradespeople, who supplied goods and services to the institution. There was a general store, a cooper's workshop, a post office, and a small community church where Dr. Finch sometimes spoke. The villagers took pride in hosting the school and often attended special events and graduation ceremonies. The first indication that something was profoundly amiss came on the morning of October 5, 1881. Lillian Marsh, a 21-year-old student from Springfield, failed to appear for morning assembly. This was highly irregular, as Lillian was renowned for her punctuality and had never missed a gathering in her year at the school. When her roommate, Eleanor Webb, went to check on her, she found Lillian thrashing on her bed, her body contorted by violent seizures while incomprehensible words spilled from her lips. But what struck Eleanor most profoundly was not the convulsions or the strange speech. It was Lillian's eyes, which had clouded over with a completely silver, metallic film, as if liquid mercury had been poured over her irises. Eleanor immediately called for assistance, her cries echoing through the residence halls and rousing other students from their morning routines. Within minutes, Several classmates had gathered in Lillian's room, their faces ashen with shock and alarm as they witnessed their friend's inexplicable torment. The convulsions were unlike anything they had ever seen. Lillian's spine arched so severely that only her head and heels touched the mattress, and her limbs flailed with such force that it required 3 students to restrain her and prevent self-injury. Dr. Finch arrived within moments, having heard the disturbance from his nearby residence. The school's head was a man who prided himself on maintaining equanimity in crises, but even he was visibly disturbed by what he observed. Lillian's eyes had rolled back, and the words pouring from her mouth sounded like Greek, but were distorted into something that seemed to profane the very prayers and scientific principles they were taught. Ho theos hemen katabinei eis Hayden, Lillian repeated over and over, her voice growing more guttural with each repetition. Soma daimonion, psyche appolito. The words were recognizable as Greek, but they formed phrases that no sane individual would utter. Dar. Finch, who had a scholarly knowledge of Greek from his medical studies, felt a chill course through him as he realized Lillian was speaking blasphemous inversions of sacred and philosophical texts. Dr. Finch immediately summoned the local physician, Dr. Julian Moss, who resided in Oakhaven. A messenger was dispatched on horseback through the muddy lanes with instructions to bring the doctor back with all haste. While they waited, Dr. Finch led the assembled students in prayer for Lillian's recovery, though their voices wavered with trepidation and fear. Dr. Moss arrived within 2 hours, his medical bag in hand and his expression grave. He had practiced medicine for over 35 years and had witnessed his share of peculiar ailments. But what he encountered at Blackwood House that day would shadow him for the remainder of his days. Lillian's symptoms defied everything Dr. Moss understood about medicine. The young woman's pulse was rapid and erratic, sometimes racing so fast it seemed her heart would fail, then suddenly slowing to a faint, thready rhythm. His examination uncovered other alarming signs. Lillian's breathing was labored and accompanied by a strange, high-pitched keening that seemed to emanate from deep within her chest. Her skin had taken on a peculiar, waxy pallor that Dr. Moss had never observed in a living patient, and dark, web-like veins were visible beneath the surface, pulsing with an unnatural cadence. The silver film had spread from her eyes to the surrounding skin, and similar metallic patches were appearing on her throat and the backs of her hands. Most disturbing were the words she spoke during her seizures. The Greek phrases were consistently sacrilegious, inverting traditional prayers and philosophical axioms in ways that suggested either deep scholarly knowledge or some form of preternatural influence. Dr. Moss, though not an overtly religious man, found himself profoundly unsettled by the precision and consistency of Lillian's profane utterances. Dr. Moss administered potassium bromide to calm the convulsions and applied cool cloths to reduce the fever, but nothing proved effective. He attempted venesection, following the medical customs of the era, but the blood that flowed from the incisions was darker than usual and coagulated almost instantly. He tried to induce vomiting to expel any potential toxins, but Lillian's stomach yielded only a foul-smelling, dark green bile that stained the basin and filled the room with a scent like spoiled copper. Throughout the day, news of Lillian's state spread through the school community. Students gathered in hushed clusters, whispering prayers and speculating on what could have caused their classmates' bizarre affliction. Some proposed it might be a severe form of brain fever, though none had seen fever present in such a ghastly manner. Others wondered if Lillian had been exposed to a toxic substance in the laboratory. A few of the more superstitious students began to murmur about divine retribution or spectral invasion, though Dr. Finch quickly quashed such talk. He reminded them that they were training to be women of science and service and should seek rational explanations for unusual events rather than yielding to superstition. However, even Dr. Finch found himself grappling to interpret Lillian's symptoms in purely medical terms. As evening descended, Lillian's condition continued to worsen. The convulsions grew more violent, and the blasphemous Greek phrases gave way to sounds that seemed scarcely human. Charlotte Finch, despite her husband's objections, insisted on helping to tend to Lillian, bringing fresh water and clean linens. She was struck by how cold Lillian's skin felt, despite the fever that was clearly consuming her. The other students maintained a prayer vigil throughout the night, taking turns reading psalms and offering supplications for their friend's recovery. The atmosphere in the residence was one of profound sorrow and mounting dread as the young women confronted the possibility of losing their classmate to this mysterious ailment. Lillian Marsh died at 3 a.m. on October 6, precisely 21 hours after the first convulsions began. Her final moments were marked by a sudden return of consciousness and lucidity that startled all present. The convulsions ceased, her eyes focused, and she looked directly at Dr. Moss with an expression of absolute terror and remorse. Her final words, spoken with clarity just before her death, were recorded by Dr. Moss in his notes: the locket in the hall. Heaven forgive us all. The words were uttered with such intensity that everyone present felt their import, though none comprehended Lillian's meaning. Dr. Moss noted that her voice had returned to its normal tone for these final words, in stark contrast to the guttural sounds of her illness. After speaking, Lillian's eyes closed, her breathing ceased, and her body relaxed into the stillness of death. The silver discoloration began to fade from her skin almost immediately, leaving behind only the pale complexion of a young woman who had died far from home. Dr. Moss examined the body thoroughly, noting that many of the strange symptoms had vanished with death, as if whatever had afflicted Lillian had departed with her final breath. The funeral was held 2 days later, Lillian's body interred in the small graveyard behind the main hall. Dr. Finch delivered a moving eulogy about the young woman's dedication to her studies and her desire to serve humanity. He spoke of Lillian's intellectual gifts and her passion for scientific inquiry, traits that had made her a standout among both faculty and students. The service was attended by all students and staff, as well as several townsfolk who had known Lillian. Many wept openly as they bid farewell to their friend. Fiona O'Malley, the youngest student, was particularly devastated, as Lillian had acted as an older sister to her. Clara Vance offered a prayer at the graveside, asking God to receive Lillian's soul and grant comfort to the mourners. But even as they grieved, a sense of disquiet had settled over the school. The bizarre nature of Lillian's illness, the speed of her decline, and her cryptic final words had unsettled everyone's sense of security. Dr. Moss had assured them that Lillian's death was likely an isolated incident, perhaps caused by tainted food or exposure to an unknown chemical. But his assurances rang hollow in the face of such extraordinary symptoms. The autumn seemed to close in around the school with renewed intensity after Lillian's death. The rains fell more heavily, the winds moaned louder through the pines, and the building seemed to creak and groan under the weight of the damp and the burden of sorrow. Students began complaining of strange nightmares and sleeplessness. Some reported hearing whispers in the corridors at night, though investigations always revealed empty passageways. The atmosphere of diligent study began to yield to something more anxious and fearful. Professor Crow noticed his students seemed distracted during anatomy recitations, their minds clearly elsewhere. Professor White found her hygiene lectures, usually received with keen interest, were met with worried faces and distant stares out at the bleak landscape. Dr. Finch attempted to maintain normalcy by adhering strictly to the school schedule and encouraging students to find solace in their studies and devotions. He increased the frequency of assembly services and arranged special prayer meetings focused on seeking divine comfort. But despite his efforts, the specter of Lillian's death hung over the community like a persistent fog. What none of them realized was that Lillian Marsh's death was merely the beginning. The true horror would unfold over the following weeks, claiming life after life in a pattern so precise and methodical it would challenge everything the survivors believed about sickness, death, and the nature of evil itself. 3 days after Lillian's funeral, on October 9, another student began exhibiting the same terrifying symptoms. Beatrice Croft, a bright young woman from Boston who had been Lillian's lab partner and closest confidant, awoke her roommate with the same violent convulsions. The seizures began at exactly 3 in the morning, the same hour Lillian had died, a coincidence noted by those who witnessed both events. The pattern was identical in every detail. The same silvered eyes appeared within hours. The same twisted Greek phrases poured from her lips, and the same waxy pallor spread across her skin. Beatrice's roommate, Cora Jennings, immediately recognized the symptoms and ran to fetch Dr. Finch and Dr. Moss, her heart gripped by panic. Dr. Moss was summoned again, this time with a growing sense of dread. He had spent the days since Lillian's death researching every medical text available, seeking an explanation. He had written to colleagues in Boston and New York describing the case, but nothing in his library or correspondence offered clues to what he had seen. The silvered eyes, the convulsions, the strange vocalizations, individually, each symptom might have a rational explanation. Poisoning could cause convulsions. Certain neurological conditions could affect the eyes. Delirium could lead to incoherent speech. But together, they formed a pattern outside the bounds of known medicine. As Dr. Moss examined Beatrice Croft, he was struck by the precise similarity to Lillian's condition. Not only were the symptoms identical, but they progressed at exactly the same rate. The silver discoloration spread at the same speed, the fever followed the same pattern, and even the specific Greek phrases were repeated verbatim. It was as if Beatrice was following a predetermined script written by Lillian's illness. The students who gathered were now openly terrified. The coincidence of 2 identical illnesses shattered any remaining hope that Lillian's death had been isolated. Whispers about curses and divine wrath spread through the residence, though Dr. Finch continued to insist on rational explanations. Beatrice Croft died exactly 21 hours after her symptoms began, just as Lillian had. Her final words were identical, the locket in the hall. Heaven forgive us all. The precision of the timing and the repetition of the same final message sent a fresh wave of fear through the community. Dr. Moss now suspected some form of contagion, though he had never encountered a disease with such consistent symptoms and timing. The possibility of contagion led Dr. Moss to order Beatrice's body prepared for burial immediately and her personal effects burned as a precaution. He instituted quarantine procedures, isolating anyone who had been in close contact with either Lillian or Beatrice. The residence where both had lived was sealed and fumigated with vinegar and carbolic acid, standard practices for infectious diseases. The students were now palpably terrified, their fear evident in every conversation and visible on every face. 2 deaths in a week, following the same horrifying pattern, had shattered their sense of safety. The school, once a place of learning and purpose, now felt like a trap. Dr. Finch attempted to maintain order by increasing assembly services and encouraging prayer and study. He also wrote to the association headquarters in Boston, informing them of the situation and requesting guidance. The response from Boston was swift. Mrs. Genevieve Albright, a senior administrator, was dispatched immediately to investigate and assist. Mrs. Albright was known for her calm demeanor and practical approach to crisis management. But before Mrs. Albright could arrive, the pattern repeated. On October 12, 3 days after Beatrice's death, it happened a 3rd time. The victim was Abigail Miller, the cheerful, robust farmer's daughter from the Connecticut Valley. Her illness sent shockwaves through the community. The pattern was identical, violent convulsions beginning at 3 a.m., silvered eyes, twisted Greek phrases, waxy pallor, and death exactly 21 hours later. Abigail's final words were the same as her predecessors. Dr. Moss had now witnessed 3 deaths following the same impossible pattern. As a man of science, he struggled to accept what he was seeing. The symptoms defied medical explanation, the timing was unnaturally precise, and the final words suggested shared knowledge connecting the victims. He began to suspect the deaths might not be natural, but he had no framework for understanding what they could be. Mrs. Albright's arrival on October 15 brought some relief to the beleaguered school. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and perceptive gray eyes, she had served the association for over 40 years. She immediately took charge with the authority of decades of experience. Mrs. Albright convened a meeting with Dr. Finch, Dr. Moss, and the senior faculty. She listened carefully to Dr. Moss's account, asking pointed questions. Her assessment was pragmatic, though privately she was deeply troubled. Mrs. Albright concluded they were dealing with an unidentified, highly contagious disease. She ordered the institution quarantined immediately, with no one permitted to enter or leave until the epidemic passed. She sent word to Boston explaining the situation and dispatched letters to the students' families assuring them of the precautions. The quarantine transformed Blackwood House from a school into a prison of fear. The 33 remaining students found themselves trapped with whatever was killing their classmates. The normal rhythms of academic life became secondary to the constant vigil. Mrs. Albright established a strict schedule of prayer services and a buddy system for the students to monitor each other. The 4th death came on October 18, claiming Eliza Thorpe, the quiet, devout young woman from the Berkshires. Her illness began at exactly 3 a.m., following the same terrifying, grimly familiar pattern. The convulsions, the silvered eyes, the profane Greek, the waxy skin, all appeared on schedule. Dr. Moss documented every detail, noting the identical phrases. Eliza died exactly 21 hours later, her final words the same. The mention of a locket in the hall now intrigued both Dr. Moss and Mrs. Albright. The consistency of the message across 4 victims suggested it was not mere delirium. Mrs. Albright approached Dr. Finch about searching the assembly hall, but he was reluctant to disturb the space based on the ravings of the dying. He preferred to focus on medical solutions. However, Mrs. Albright's experience had taught her that dying words often revealed secrets the living were reluctant to acknowledge. The consistency, combined with the inexplicable deaths, convinced her an investigation was necessary. By October 20, the school was in the grip of full panic. Students refused meals, fearing contamination. They huddled in small groups, praying desperately. Some showed signs of nervous exhaustion, jumping at sounds and crying out in their sleep. The faculty struggled to maintain order. Professor Crow's anatomy classes were attended by hollow-eyed students. Professor White's lectures were interrupted by prayers and fearful outbursts. Several students wrote letters home begging to leave. Clara Vance, the eldest, tried to provide leadership and comfort, but even she was buckling under the pressure. It was on the night of October 20 that the first break in the pattern occurred. Eleanor Webb, who had been Lillian Marsh's roommate and witnessed the first death, approached Dr. Moss with information that changed everything. Visibly shaken, Eleanor confessed that she and several others had been part of a secret literary society that met in the assembly hall after evening services. They had been studying a locket that Lillian had discovered in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. A locket none of them had seen before, that seemed to contain knowledge beyond their regular studies. The revelation struck Dr. Moss profoundly. Here was a connection between the victims. If they had all been part of this secret society, their deaths might be linked to whatever they had been studying. Eleanor's hands shook as she described the locket. According to her, it was made of a strange, cold metal that seemed to be a silver-nickel alloy, etched with symbols none could fully decipher. The discovery had been made by Lillian during cleaning duties in early August. She found a loose floorboard under a rug, revealing a small space containing the locket and other old items. Lillian had been fascinated and shared it with her closest friends, Beatrice, Abigail, Eliza, Eleanor, and Clara. The 6 young women formed a secret society to examine the locket and decipher its symbols. They met twice weekly after evening assembly. The locket appeared to be some form of mnemonic device or talisman, but its symbols and intricate engraving suggested knowledge of metaphysical practices far beyond their curriculum. The symbols were interspersed with Greek words and strange glyphs. Lillian had been convinced the locket contained secret wisdom that could enhance their understanding of healing and make them more effective caregivers. She argued that fate had led her to it. The others, initially skeptical, were gradually won over by Lillian's enthusiasm. As Eleanor continued, Dr. Moss began to understand the full scope. The secret society had been meeting for nearly 3 months before the first death. Eleanor described how the group members began to feel superior, believing they were chosen for special knowledge. Their activities had not gone entirely unnoticed. Lights were seen in the hall at odd hours, and strange chanting was heard. Dr. Finch had investigated but found nothing. The group had been careful. Eleanor revealed the locket's engravings contained not just symbols but instructions for mental exercises and practices. Some involved meditation techniques unlike anything they were taught. Others included breathing exercises, specific visualizations, and instructions for creating what the engravings described as focus circles, using candles, herbs, and geometric patterns drawn on parchment. The group had begun implementing these practices, initially with seemingly positive results. They reported vivid, lucid dreams where they communicated with luminous beings who revealed profound truths about the connection between mind and body. They felt more mentally acute, and their academic performance improved. But the supposed benefits came with a price. The members began experiencing physical symptoms they initially dismissed as signs of mental expansion, headaches, insomnia, and a cold tingling in their hands. Lillian, as the leader, experienced the most severe symptoms, a constant metallic taste in her mouth and auditory hallucinations of whispering voices. Instead of alarm, Thomas interpreted these as signs of spiritual advancement. The group also noticed changes in their relationships, growing impatient with conventional teaching and seeing themselves as an elite. Clara Vance had begun to have doubts. In September, she told Eleanor of nightmares where the luminous beings revealed themselves as sinister, their wisdom turning to mockery. Clara wanted to end the meetings and return the locket, but Lillian convinced her the doubts were a test of their commitment. The pressure to continue was intense. Lillian became obsessed, spending hours copying symbols. She spoke of their group as the conduits destined to transform modern nursing. As Eleanor's confession continued, Dr. Moss pieced together a timeline connecting the group's activities to the deaths. The first symptoms appeared in late September, starting with Lillian but affecting all members. The physical symptoms were accompanied by psychological changes, increased irritability, paranoia, and a growing sense of superiority. The locket's instructions also contained warnings about the consequences of improper study or abandonment, implying terrible punishments for those who proved unworthy. When Dr. Moss pressed Eleanor about the locket's current location, she grew pale. She revealed it had disappeared from its hiding place 3 days before Lillian's death. The group had gathered on October 2 to find the compartment empty. They searched but found no trace. The disappearance threw them into a panic. Lillian became agitated and paranoid, accusing others of theft. In the days that followed, their symptoms worsened. The headaches became constant, the insomnia deepened, and they shared nightmares of being pursued by shadows. Eleanor's revelation cast the deaths in a new light. If the victims had all been part of this secret society, their deaths might be connected to psychological or spiritual processes triggered by the locket. Dr. Moss realized he needed to share this with Mrs. Albright immediately. The discovery of the secret society sent shockwaves through the school when Dr. Moss shared Eleanor's confession. Mrs. Albright's reaction was decisive. She ordered a full investigation, interrogating every student and faculty member. What she uncovered was a conspiracy of silence, with nearly half the student body aware of the secret meetings but too frightened to speak. Mrs. Albright's investigation revealed the depth of the deception. Students came forward with accounts of lights in the hall, strange chanting, and behavioral changes in the group members. Professor Crow revealed he had noticed changes in the group's academic work and argumentativeness. Professor White reported similar observations. The group had become dismissive of traditional methods. The truth was more disturbing than imagined. The secret society had 6 members: Lillian, Beatrice, Abigail, Eliza, Eleanor, and Clara. They had been studying the locket and implementing practices outside the bounds of rational science. Witnesses described the members exhibiting spiritual pride and exclusivity, creating tension within the student body. Mrs. Albright recognized the warning signs of heretical movements and psychological manipulation. The secrecy, claims of special revelation, growing superiority, and departure from orthodox practice pointed to a classic pattern of corruption. She also noted the significance that the deaths began after the locket disappeared, suggesting the deaths were connected to processes set in motion by the group's activities. Mrs. Albright ordered a thorough search of the assembly hall despite Dr. Finch's reluctance. The search revealed the hidden compartment Eleanor described, with traces of wax and herbs. It also uncovered geometric patterns carved into the floorboards under the rug. Most significantly, they found a collection of papers hidden elsewhere in the hall, handwritten notes by Lillian Marsh containing copies of the symbols and passages from the locket's engravings. The notes revealed the extent of the group's departure from rational science, describing practices involving communication with non-corporeal entities, techniques for altered states of consciousness, and methods for influencing others through mental focus. The language mixed scientific terminology with concepts from obscure metaphysical traditions. One particularly disturbing passage described a ritual for attuning 6 minds as one receiver, requiring 6 individuals to serve as vessels for transcendent knowledge. The ritual promised enhanced mental powers but warned of severe consequences for those unworthy or who attempted to abandon the process once begun. Dr. Moss realized the group had unknowingly been performing a version of this ritual, initiating a process now claiming their lives. The 5th death occurred on October 21st, claiming Clara Vance herself. The timing was significant, as Clara had been the doubting member. Her death followed the pattern, but her final words were different. Instead of referencing the locket, she spoke repeatedly of being chosen as a key, and the gate must be closed. Dr. Moss noted this deviation, wondering if it provided a clue. Eleanor Webb was now the only surviving member of the original society, a fact noted by all. She was consumed with guilt and terror, convinced she would be next. The psychological pressure was enormous. Mrs. Albright and Dr. Moss spent hours questioning her for any clue to break the pattern. Eleanor revealed the locket's engravings contained prophecies. The 6 members were destined to serve as conduits, allowing transcendent entities to manifest. The process required the sacrifice of their physical lives, their mental energy fueling the manifestation. The prophecies suggested the process, once begun, was irreversible. The 6 were marked and bound together, their lives claimed at predetermined intervals. Dr. Moss suspected mass hysteria or shared delusion triggered by guilt and fear. The power of suggestion, combined with isolation and stress, could manifest as physical symptoms. But the precision of timing and symptoms made this inadequate. Mrs. Albright believed the group had encountered genuinely dangerous psychological or spiritual forces, their arrogance opening them to influences that were now claiming their lives. The tension reached a breaking point on October 22. Eleanor, unable to bear the guilt and experiencing the same symptoms, headaches, insomnia, metallic taste, made a desperate decision. Convinced she would die next, she sought to understand what happened and find a way to break the pattern. Her search led her to explore forgotten parts of the school. Remembering Lillian thought the locket predated the school, she investigated its history. Her search took her to a storage attic, where behind a false wall she discovered a hidden trunk filled with items predating the school's construction. There were books, documents, and artifacts deliberately concealed before the building was finished. Most importantly, the trunk contained evidence of the true identity of the woman for whom the school was named. The documents painted a picture of Lady Eleanor Blackwood completely different from the heroic benefactor. The real Eleanor Blackwood had indeed been a philanthropist but was also involved in transcendentalist and mesmeric practices that scandalized Boston society. According to the documents, Blackwood had been a respected figure until she became involved with mystical practices, claiming they would unlock human potential. She incorporated elements of animal magnetism, phrenology, and spiritualism into her work. Her followers were initially impressed by her apparent insights. But as her practices grew more extreme, opposition mounted. Several associates accused her of dabbling in forces she didn't understand. The situation culminated in 1869 when Blackwood attempted a great harmonizing, a ritual to permanently align the mental energies of 6 volunteers with what she called the universal mind. The ritual took place in her private salon. According to the documents, it went terribly wrong. The 6 participants died within hours, found in states witnesses described as catatonic and physically altered, with references to silvered eyes and utterances in unknown tongues. The deaths caused a scandal. Blackwood was charged with negligent homicide, though she claimed the deaths were the result of the participants' own mental weaknesses. The trial was brief. Witnesses testified about her practices. Physical evidence, including mesmeric equipment and occult diagrams, convinced the jury her activities caused the deaths. Eleanor Blackwood was convicted, her reputation destroyed, and she died under mysterious circumstances in 1870, not in a railway accident. Her personal effects were confiscated by her family, who hid them to prevent further scandal. The documents revealed the land where Blackwood House was built had been purchased by her family, who established the school to restore her name, concealing the truth about her death. The discovery was staggering. The locket was likely one of Blackwood's artifacts, containing symbols and instructions for her practices. The 6 students had unknowingly recreated the conditions of the failed 1869 ritual. The pattern of deaths was identical to the historical account. Eleanor Webb now understood the full horror. The locket was not a source of wisdom but a dangerous artifact from a disgraced practitioner. The 6 students had been drawn into a deadly reenactment of a ritual that had already claimed 6 lives. The process was now playing out exactly as it had in 1869, with the same symptoms and timing. Eleanor realized the locket's disappearance was not accidental. Someone had removed it to prevent further harm or to hide the connection. She suspected Henry Finch, Dr. Finch's son, who worked in the laboratory and had access to the hull. She recalled seeing him near the hall on the day the locket disappeared. Henry had always been interested in the student's activities, and his father had taught him some medical procedures. Eleanor confronted Henry in the laboratory. He initially denied knowledge but broke down under her questioning. He confessed he had discovered the secret society and their activities. Concerned by their strange behavior and fearing for their safety, he had taken the locket and hidden it. He had been studying it, trying to understand its purpose. He showed Eleanor where he had hidden it, in a locked cabinet in the laboratory. The locket was exactly as Eleanor remembered, a cold silver-nickel alloy with intricate engravings. Henry had been trying to decipher the symbols, consulting books on metallurgy and ancient languages. He had made little progress but had noticed the locket seemed to affect his mental state, causing headaches and disturbing dreams. He had also found references to Eleanor Blackwood's trial in old newspapers, though he hadn't made the connection until Eleanor Webb shared her discovery. Eleanor and Henry now understood the full picture. The 6 students had been drawn into a dangerous reenactment of a failed ritual, and the process was now claiming their lives. The locket was the key, and its removal had not stopped the process but had perhaps accelerated it. The deaths were continuing on schedule, suggesting the ritual had its own momentum. Eleanor and Henry decided they had to destroy the locket, hoping it would break the pattern. They took it to the school's furnace room, intending to melt it down. But as they approached the furnace, Eleanor began experiencing the first symptoms. The headache intensified, her vision blurred, and she felt the metallic taste in her mouth. She knew her time was running out. They placed the locket in the furnace, watching as the flames consumed it. The metal glowed red, then white, and finally melted into a puddle of molten alloy. As it melted, Eleanor felt a sudden release, as if a pressure had lifted. The headache subsided, the metallic taste faded, and her vision cleared. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The destruction of the locket seemed to break the pattern. The death stopped. Eleanor Webb survived, the only member of the secret society to live. The remaining students gradually recovered from their fear, though the trauma of the experience would mark them forever. The school remained quarantined for another month, but no new cases appeared. In the aftermath, Mrs. Albright and Dr. Moss compiled a full report for the association. They documented the events, the discovery of the secret society, the connection to Eleanor Blackwood, and the destruction of the locket. The report recommended the school be permanently closed, its history too tainted to continue. The association agreed, and Blackwood House was shuttered in December 1881. The remaining students were transferred to other institutions, and the faculty dispersed. Dr. Moss took the melted remains of the locket for analysis. The metallurgical report confirmed it was a unique silver-nickel alloy with traces of other metals not found in nature. The symbols, though partially melted, matched those in Lillian's notes and the Blackwood documents. Dr. Moss kept the remains in his private collection, a reminder of the events he could never fully explain. The 19 victims were buried in the school graveyard, their graves marked with simple stones. The association maintained the site for years, though it eventually fell into disrepair. The story of Blackwood House became a local legend, whispered about but never fully understood. Eleanor Webb eventually completed her nursing training at another school and served for many years in a Boston hospital. She never spoke of the events at Blackwood House, carrying the secret to her grave. Henry Finch followed his father into medicine, specializing in neurology. He never forgot the lessons of that autumn, maintaining a lifelong interest in the relationship between mind and body. The official story remained that an unidentified contagion had claimed the 19 lives. Only a handful of people knew the full truth, that the deaths were the result of a dangerous ritual set in motion decades earlier, a ritual that had found new victims in a group of ambitious young women who sought knowledge beyond their understanding. The story of Blackwood House serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. It reminds us that some mysteries are better left undisturbed, and that the line between science and superstition is sometimes thinner than we imagine. The 19 graves behind the abandoned school stand as silent testimony to the price of curiosity, and to the truth that some doors, once opened, can never fully be closed.